I'm a writer. I know dialogue.
That's a fountain of conversation, man. That's a geyser.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yes, provocative.
Oh, Daddy, stand back, man. Woo! Rock and roll!
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Subscribe, follow on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where you get videos weekly, if not more. Links to all the social media sites over at bookedonrock.com. It's another edition of The Dialogue, a chill and chat with authors, fellow podcasters, listeners, and more. We have Chauncey Haworth, Lothar Tuppan, and Mark Slade from the magazine Twisted Pulp on the show. Twisted Pulp is a monthly magazine. It brings back all that we loved in the classic pulp magazines like Mad, Cracked, and cartoons, and comics like Eerie, Heavy Metal, and The Haunt of Fear. It's packed with articles, nonfiction stories, comics, photos, and amazing artwork. It's dark, it's mysterious, it's humorous. It is an absolute must monthly read. I asked Mark, Chauncey, and Lothar about the history of the magazine, how it all got started, what are the magazines and comics they read growing up. We also talk horror films, the history of the occult in rock and roll, and the origins of the legendary Crossroads story. Did Robert Johnson sell his soul to the devil in exchange for musical brilliance? It turns out this story didn't even originate with Robert Johnson. The guys get into that as well, so let's get started. Here are Chauncey Haworth, Lothar Tuppan, and Mark Slade from Twisted Pulp. Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing great.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Let's start with the magazine Twisted Pulp, which I love. How did the idea to launch this magazine come about? What inspired you to start the project?
Years ago, I met Lothar through another producer when I used to do audio dramas, and he was suggested as an actor, and discovering how great an actor Lothar is, I wanted to keep him around. And then through a series of emails, realized how many great ideas he had. I was like, yeah, I want to be like Tom Petty and keep Mike Campbell with me. You know what I'm saying? Because the dude is extremely smart and, knows quite a bit about things. So we got to talking. We did the audio dramas. Then I was interviewed by Chauncey on his radio show, and we got to talking, and he expressed his love for everything pulp and was really interested in audio drama. We ended up doing an audio drama together, all three of us. Then one day out of the blue, Chauncey asked, hey, you've got that radio show, Twisted Pulp Radio Hour. Have you ever thought of doing a magazine? And I was like, every day I think of that. And I said, I know somebody who might be able to do some editing for us because the dude's really good at stuff like that. And that's pretty much how it started. And from there, we also try to bring on Cameron Hampton, our artist, and she's part of the group, but she's always busy. Got a lot of projects going. So
where are you guys from? You're out of Virginia?
Yeah, I'm from Virginia.
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. And Chauncey?
I was originally Northern California when I first met Mark, but now I'm Southern Oregon, which is pretty close to Northern California.
Wow, yeah, okay, so you guys are all in different parts of the country. So this launched, September of 2020, right?
Yeah, wow, it's been that long. Huh.
In our third year of issues, but our first year took about 2 years. So our first 12 issues took about 2 years. Then our second 12 issues took 1 year. And so now we're working on our third year of issues. I know that.
What were the magazines and the comics that you guys were fans of growing up that influenced Twisted Pulp?
Mad Magazine, Heavy Metal, National Lampoon, which wasn't allowed to see, but I definitely snuck peeks at bookstores.
Under your mattress?
No. There was other magazines under that, so I won't even mention those.
Those are an influence too,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, but the thing is, you're drawn to those magazines, like Mad Magazine. They're not your parents' magazine.
Oh, when we first started, we were most definitely more satire than anything.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of satire. There was a lot of influence from Weird Tales magazine. A lot of the early pulps, hence Twisted Pulp. I would say the Twilight Zone magazine to some degree from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, it's quite the little bouillabaisse of all sorts of stuff in the stew.
the other influence, I would say, and it's half a negative influence and half a positive, is Rolling Stone magazine. I'm not even close a fan of Rolling Stone magazine, but it was the music magazine. Besides Guitar World, Guitar Player, I don't remember what year Spin came out. I think Spin's a much better magazine because they give people much more of a chance for everybody to see. Rolling Stone always had this thing where they were, hard rock was not their thing. It was the hippie movement, and even Paul McCartney was a part of their Eerie. They didn't like him, so they gave him bad reviews. And with this, like with people like you writing our articles, I wanted to find out what people enjoyed, what they were interested in, and write that and put that out there. And let's just bring rock back instead of saying that rock and roll is everything. And it's not everything. It's a certain type of music. That's just how it is.
What we aspire to deliver, I feel, is a little taste of each of these influences that we've talked about. So like with the comedy, that's coming from, old magazines like National Lampoons, like Mark was saying. And ideally, I think somebody would look at it on the whole and say, these are coming from these channels, these obvious influences that at the time might have been quite separate, but history has clumped together.
That's true. Everything. And when we started it, we had the huge discussion of, well, what direction do we go? We know it's going to be pulp. We know it's going to be stories and art. And I was like, why don't we just throw everything in but the kitchen sink? Let's just because it says pulp in the title doesn't mean it has to stick with pulp.
The early days of pulp, it was really talking about the paper, not a genre. It became a genre later on. So there was all sorts of stuff going on there. And I think having even like the lo-fi sort of content with Chauncey's hi-fi design layout, because his design layout is really excellent. When we started doing music reviews and Mark was curating that, and then it was coming across my desk for editing, one of the things I noticed was that whether or not they were directly influenced by this or not, it reminded me of some of the zines of like the late 80s and early 90s in the punk scene of like Maximum Rock and Roll. It had more of that sort of feel of reviews of things or analysis of stuff. There's a lot of fan in there where they were also going deep into it, but it didn't have that sort of glossy for a mass audience view of like a Rolling Stone magazine. It was more like, here's something by a fan for another fan or to convince someone to be a fan. And it sort of had that deep dive, a little bit of an edginess that was in maybe some of the music scenes of the 80s and 90s.
You get into some of the obscure classic but forgotten horror films, and I'm a huge horror fan. There was recently a review of the 1986 film Trick or Treat, which had Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne in it. It's about a teenager who is haunted by the ghost of his rock hero, and that's one I need to see. I've never seen it, and I'm ashamed to say. I'm embarrassed. But I look to films
I
like
wrote
Black.
that. It is
it's
a
lot
way
of fun
better
as
movie.
as long as you weren't a metalhead at the time, you felt like it was a sellout of like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not like that guy. That guy's a wuss. What are you talking about? But it's still really fun. It makes a great double feature with Airheads.
I was going to say, I look to a film like Black Christmas from 1974, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of course. You can go back to 1932's Freaks, The Bride of Frankenstein from 35, absolute high mark of that era. What are some of the classic horror films you guys are big fans of? I'm curious.
So many.
You go back to the 30s? I mean, you go all the way back?
Pretty kind of.
Silent era.
Also the 50s. I really love the Fearless Vampire Killers. I think Roman Polanski, with a micro budget, made an excellent film, and he disowns it, and which shows, what does he know? He don't even know his own film. Chinatown's a great film, but Fearless Vampire Killers is really great, with very minimum budget, really good acting. He got good acting even from certain people that you wouldn't think would be good actors. The Horror of Dracula, all the Hammer films. Let's Scare Jessica to Death. That has influenced me all my life. Do you remember seeing that, Lothar, when you were a kid on television? Mm-hmm. How about you, Chauncey?
Oh, yeah, I saw it. Absolutely.
I've got to see that one, too. I've never seen it.
Horror is how I got here, and it's a little bit of an embarrassing story. So I was like 9, and I didn't want to go to school anymore. And so I'd stay home all the time. I literally stayed home like 2 or 3 days a week, soon as my mom would leave, I'd go up to the video store, and I'd rent horror flicks. But this was before you could not check out rated R movies. So as a teenager with needs, I was immediately drawn to the horror films because there was a good gamble that you could see some boobs in a
absolutely
in a horror film.
Yes.
And so I ended up and so by the time I was 12, I had seen the entire horror section and had fallen in love with horror to the point where I was going back to the silent films, over to the Godzilla films. I just didn't even care anymore. There might have been something to horror desensitizing me to boobs, because by the time I was 12 or 13, I'm just all, yeah, but what about the story? It's
dude, I feel like I'm looking in the mirror right now. I'm exactly the same way. There's an art to this. Yeah. But now you have Jordan Peele and Jason Blum, and that's now every weekend there's 2 horror films out. I mean, it's every weekend. What do you think of the current day horror? Are you a fan of Jordan Peele and Jason Blum?
It's such a weird genre because it's gotten almost like heavy metal now. You need to qualify what you mean by that, because at one point you could say you were a horror fan, and if that was in the 70s, it meant you were probably a monster kid. You grew up on famous monsters of filmland. You were probably, watched a certain type of creature feature type flick with maybe some of the 70s New Hollywood slasher type stuff that was coming out. And now it's really well, do you mean French Extremity? Do you mean this? Do you mean that? You really need to qualify it. So some things I like, some things I don't. I love anything that has to do with some sort of occult or supernatural or reality bending stuff, from Jacob's Ladder for a dated one to a more, maybe a more recent sort of thing that might be well, maybe it's psychological, maybe it's not.
Here's the big question now. What's the best Friday the 13th? Because for me, it's 3. I love 3.
Yeah.
Oh, 3?
Yeah.
Yep.
Love 3. 2.
Best is a broad term. Do you mean best in the campy fun, or best in the best made film? Because the best made film is probably 2 or 1.
Okay.
In the campiest of fun, Jason in Space, Manhattan, where he actually
part 10,
throws up 3 gallons of water when he comes out. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there.
I've always been partial to part 2. The head in the refrigerator was a shock, and this was on regular UHF television. My mom was watching one of her movies, so it was probably an Alan
Alda,
and
the Four Seasons.
The Mephisto Waltz. Remember, it was in the Mephisto Waltz.
Now that's a good movie. That's a really weird, good 70s movie. And she got up and she said, "Well, I've already seen this probably 10 times. You can turn it." So I turned it, and it was Friday the 13th Part 2, and it came right to that scene with the head in the refrigerator, and I was like, "Holy shit!"
I love 2. Really is great, and I just found out that the opening scene where the little kid is walking in the puddles, and then they go up to the house, and then inside, and then there's a refrigerator scene, filmed right near me here in Connecticut, Waterbury, Connecticut.
Oh,
there's websites, so many websites of all this little trivia. And and the first one was filmed right near me too. The first one was right near Kent, Connecticut here, a lake. And there's the hilarious story that the woman told, the one who's Jason's mother. And she was a serious actress. And her agent called and said, "We got a role for you. It's, I don't know if you're going to like it, but hey, they're paying $12,000. And she's like, "What is it?" "It's a horror film." I don't want to do this." And he said, "Just read the script, give it a look." She reads the script. She's like, "This is trash." Well, her car breaks down. She needs another car. She goes to this dealership. "I want that car. How much is it?" $12,000. She remembered. She calls her agent and says, "I'll take the role." So she can get a car. Classic.
Or Part 4, Part 4 is pretty legendary too, because that's the copycat killer. It was the ambulance driver. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
I have a soft spot for Part 6 because my best friend's wife is Carrie Noonan, who played Paula in that. So
get out.
Oh wow.
Oh, awesome.
Which she did a lot of acting, but then she got out of acting, and now she's got a PhD in either anthropology or folkloristics. I can't remember which, and teaches in Vermont.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. I asked, what are the books on rock that you've read? and that you want to talk about. Now, Mark, we both read Wicked Game, the biography of James Calvin Wilsey by Michael Goldberg, and I cannot say enough about this book. Wilsey was the guitarist on Chris Isaak's Wicked Game, extremely talented, another taken down by drug addiction, tragic story, cautionary story. I did have Michael on the show, thanks to you, Mark, because you connected me to Michael.
Yeah. Well, that was weird. I was on my messages, and I kept seeing there was one message in my box, and I couldn't figure out. I kept going down and saying, did I not respond? And I kept going. So then I went to my spam, and there was this message. Well, no, who is this? And I clicked on it, and it was an offer to read or see a promo of his book. And I'm like, I don't wonder why he sent this. And I go, I was on James Calvin Wilsey's Facebook. He had a page. Right before he died, he used to post things.
Oh, his own page, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of his because I didn't know him from the Avengers, but I didn't know that he was a member until I read an interview with him in Guitar World about it. And yeah, James Calvin Wilsey, what a sad story, man.
Sad story. Brilliant guitarist. People give him a listen. James Calvin Wilsey had like one solo album out, and it's absolutely amazing. And the book is too. And a couple others you mentioned, Mark. The first is Zappa the Hard Way from 2011.
Yeah, I'd like to read that. I'd like to, because I read Zappa's autobiography, which now has been said that it's mostly fiction, which is great. That's hilarious.
What a musician. And the musicians that he had in that band were
Steve Vai.
Yeah, the best of the best.
Oh, yeah, and they must have had some respect for him to want to join. People like George Duke, and I forget the violinist that he had for a short period of time.
The other one that stands out, Mark, too, I want to read now. How the Occult Saved Rock and Roll by Peter Bebergal, I think. It's from 2014.
I think that's how you say it. Yeah. That's a great book. I'm still reading it. It's more like reading a doctrine, somebody's doctrine. He goes really deep, but where it starts, the stories is great. The early 50s rock and roll stories with Elvis being in Pentecostal church and talking about Papa.
I forgot about that book. I read that book too. It's great.
I knew you would say you read that one because that's
I forgot about it until now. Yeah.
I'm at the part with Pink Floyd and their influence, especially with psychedelics and the films behind them and the clubs. UFO Club, I think it was called, is where they started. He goes way back. There was a slave who actually had joined the church, the Catholic Church. He was freed, and he was in France. I think it was France, and he decided to take some of the African legends and write them into the Bible. So Papa Legbu was a part of the devil. So whatever the stories in the Bible became mixed with the African legends and their religions, and he went to Africa to convert people, and that's how he got some of the converts in Africa to become Catholics, and that's where a lot of the legends grew for rock and roll, which is the crossroads story, which is really cool. I think that's a whole different. I don't want to call him a demon. He's not a demon. He's just a deity. And he was a trickster. I can't remember his name, but he was a trickster. And one of his things was to go to someone who's very talented and, try to get their soul for, fame and money and all that. And so that grew into, it's really fascinating. It
Robert
grew
Johnson.
into Robert Johnson.
Robert Johnson.
Now it's not even Robert Johnson. It was
misattributed. It was not Robert Johnson, actually. There was another Robert that it was actually that came from, and then it got misattributed to Johnson later on.
Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And the whole crossroads thing. Now Mark's opening up the door of my love of folkloristics and magical religious systems and mythology. But there's a European crossroads tradition, pretty much pan-human. Crossroads are always a liminal spot. So it's something special can happen. In Europe, you used to hang people at crossroads so that they couldn't find their way. A criminal could not find their way back to town and cause problems after death. So you have already things like that going on. You've got stuff coming on when you have the synchronization of the African religions and mythology with the European stuff, then it even comes more and then bursts forth into popular culture with the blues and rock and roll.
So there's a deep history there.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Jimmy Page was fascinated with Aleister Crowley, or Crowley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Aleister pronounced it Crowley.
Crowley, yeah.
Yeah, now that was the whole theory that because of that, Zeppelin was cursed, and that's why Robert Plant's son.
Yeah, I read that book.
The whole story of that is really fascinating because you've got, so he bought the whatever the name of the Boleskine Manor on Loch Ness, basically, which was owned by Crowley, but it's where Crowley was supposedly to do his summoning of the greater his greater guardian angel, and he wasn't supposed to do it until he reached a certain grade within the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and he said, I'm going to do it anyway, and supposedly failed. And that's then became, in occult circles, a urban legend of like, oh, it's funny that the Loch Ness Monster started being seen after that. Maybe that's something that Crowley inadvertently summoned. And then it goes off into other areas. And so when Page bought that house, then that tied into the whole thing of what happened with the occult energies there.
Right.
Yeah.
Like sound, people saying that you could hear the sound of somebody's head rolling down the stairs in the middle of the night and stuff like that. Yeah.
Or even though it was considered black magic, the ritual itself is really to contact your higher self so you can live a more pure life, truly in line with your divine nature. It's not anything sinister in the ritual itself from the point of view of
I
the
don't
person.
think there are any actual Satanists, frankly. On my radio show, Radio Wasteland, we've looked around, tried to get actual Satanists, and the only people we could find were just very mentally ill. Most of the actual Satanists were more the, Aleister Crowley kind or Anton LaVey kind. We couldn't find anybody that actually believed in the Satan, the God, the thing, and like Satan is my guy. It's like, which frankly I kind of think is like the American way. You got to root for the underdog. I mean, we know he's going to lose, but you got to get in there. But we just couldn't find any. But Lothar, if you know some, send them my way.
Yeah, we'll talk offline. Yeah, there are some deistic Satanists out there.
Wow, yeah. Well, Lothar, you have some great picks too. 1975's Mystery Train by Greil Marcus. Greil Marcus he's legendary. I Shot a Man in Reno by Graham Thompson. Before I Get Old by Dave Marsh. There's another great one. Kiss and Sell by C.K. Lent, which is considered like the Kiss book. I mean, that's the one. And Louder Than Hell by John Wiederhorn and Catherine Terman, I believe is the pronunciation of that. The Definitive Oral History of Metal. Now, I want to focus on this book, I Shot a Man in Reno. I'm setting up questions for John Kruth wrote a book on Dark Side of the Moon, and Dark Side turned 50 this month, so there are quite a few books. And obviously one of the topics of Dark Side of the Moon is death. This book addresses that. There's some heavy stuff in here. Yeah. The full title, by the way, is I Shot a Man in Reno, A History of Death by Murder, Suicide, Fire, Flood, Drugs, Disease, and General Misadventure as Related in Popular Song. That's quite a title.
Yeah, it's got that great academic subtitle, right?
Yeah. So what's the basic overall premise of this book?
Well, one of the things I liked about both Greil Marcus's book and this one is the history of ideas. And for anybody who loves rock and roll deeply, it's like finding out where all this stuff came from and some of the influences. And one of the themes that comes up in I Shot a Man in Reno is the overlap between pre-recording and pre-marketing and the business of the rock and roll industry or the music industry is the folk record of people just playing music. And you had to be there to listen to the music. You couldn't have something else, and how that sort of flowed over into then popular music. And I think one of the things that's really important, like a good question to ask people would be like, oh, well, do you know what the one thing that Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, and Wanted Man by Styx have in common? Well, they're all influenced by the murder ballad. And how the murder ballad was an actual folk music thing that was going on that was also coming back into play when folk music was getting resurgence. And so a lot of these rock bands are going, what are all these songs about murder? What are all these songs about like really strange, like horrible people that we don't want to root for, but we do? And that all comes out of the murder ballad tradition, which of course Nick Cave did a whole album about murder ballads as well.
And what is it about songs about death? I mean, is it comforting, or is it just because of the unknown of what happens with that? I mean, what do you think our fascination is with songs about death?
Well, it is the big existential question. There's actually anthropologists that have sort of made the argument that almost every religious ritual, initiatory practice from early Greek times, with the initiatory mystery cults up to modern day things, is preparing us for death, which is the biggest initiation for us. We have no idea. It's hard to not be fascinated by it, especially in our culture where we push it away. Like you just said, it's something we don't want to look at. We push it away, where there's other cultures where maybe we interact with it a little bit more. We, even now there's like a lot of people that don't even really want to go to funerals, and you don't want to, necessarily interact with someone who might be a mortician, or you just try and, we're all about staying young. We're all about immortality. That's a lot of the whole transhumanist movement, is let's deny death. But we can't deny death, and people keep dying in our lives, and we get sick and we get fearful of our own death if we almost have like a car accident or something. So music, fiction, horror movies, any of that stuff is our way of wrestling with that big existential question.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think, well, that also plays into horror films too. Like, what is it
Absolutely.
about? Why do I love this stuff so much? What is it? There's something psychological about a good jump scare too. It's like a release.
My wife is a sociologist, and
okay.
And one thing that I've learned about horror films is historically they're more popular when there's more fear running around, and if they're gaining some popularity now, that might be why.
The best horror film is the one that has less gore, because you're building up. Like Halloween is the classic, just the suspense. There's more to it. In fact, the smaller the budget, the more challenging it is. Like Steven Spielberg and Jaws. Shark's not working. Okay, what do? We're going to build suspense. With Halloween,
Film around it.
Hey, we got a shoestring budget, and let's. I love the story with Halloween too, about that. This is filmed in Pasadena, and they have leaves, and they have one bag of leaves, and they just spray painted them brown and orange, and they would, for each scene, drop them on the ground, pick them up, go to the next scene. I mean, it was like that low budget.
That's how you would have so much respect for somebody like John Carpenter, because he's always thinking of ways to get around things. I don't think that low budget has ever gotten out of him, even with the bigger budget. Even with a bad movie like Ghost of Mars, I know that he was trying to figure out another way of doing it to cut costs. And maybe a scene with an actor wasn't working, so hey, let's pan across their feet while they're saying their lines. Right. Things like that,
I think The Thing might have been his first big budget film, or The Fog, maybe. The Fog might have been.
Maybe The Fog, but I don't think The Fog had that big of a budget as The Thing. Definitely The Thing was huge. Was that Universal that put that out? I think it was Universal,
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, if it had that big of a budget, it'd be called A Crystal Clear Night. Low budget made him go, maybe we should call it The Fog.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the unknown, death being the unknown, and that's what made Halloween so great. Michael Myers' character is John Carpenter wanted Michael to be someone who killed just for the sake of killing. There's no reason. Jamie Lee's not his sister. He just killed. And so that thought that somebody could be out there and could just randomly kill me is more frightening than anything else. But for some reason, Hollywood feels that need they got to have something, especially when they have sequels. They feel this need to where they can't, like the last Halloween film.
Oh Lord!
And it just got so convoluted with the plot line. Why not just bring it back to what it was? Michael's still alive. He's in town. Build up the suspense. He's following Jamie Lee, and then at the end, the final battle. But no, we've got this whole storyline of this teenage kid, or not even teenager. He's like in his 20s, and he gets picked on and suddenly turns evil. And it's like, what the fuck?
Well,
what's going on?
One? It does have to follow society somewhat. It's like like you were saying about Michael Myers being just the killer who kills for killing. I'm sure a lot of that is built upon the sort of disaster films of the early 70s and late 60s of just people dealing with something unstoppable. And then, we were kind of set up to listen to that story. What were you going to say, Lothar?
Oh, I was say there's, a couple of things going on with Halloween, and originally his thing of like, here's a flesh and blood character, and we're also calling him the boogeyman, and he acts a little bit like the boogeyman. There's something that he's neither completely supernatural or completely replicable in a human sense of what does he make sense. And so we're coming also out of a decade of the Manson murders and then the Zodiac killer.
Yeah.
And then to tie into something else
the
with
golden
horror
age
in
of
general.
serial killers.
And we've got the horror aspect of people don't like anything around death or horror to be unexplained. We don't like mayhem. We don't like chaos. We want to have a reason. This is why even sometimes when people are in a car accident that's not their fault, they will blame themselves, because it's easier to say, I'm at fault than, oh my God, nobody was at fault. Nobody, because if it's no one's fault, no one has any control. Everybody likes to have control over life. They like to say there is some way of having control. And when you then mix that with studio suits that are making movies by committee and spreadsheet, they're all about control. So you've got that unconscious, subconscious urge to, we need to have control or else it's too uncomfortable for us, so we need to explain why, and this will make it more marketable, and we can do 20 sequels, and who cares if it's actually worthwhile anything. Then
slap a hero's journey on it, it'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, this is no longer horror, this is just really horrible consumerism, which is its own kind of horror.
And that's true. No, he's right. Yeah, absolutely true. Both of you are right. People don't like things that are not explained. Why is David Lynch still popular to some degree? None of his films, books, or
I don't
movies
know why.
make
His
any
best
sense.
movie was Dude.
Oh, hey, that's a great film. I'm sorry, that's a great film, though. I like it better than Star Wars, most definitely.
I love David Lynch, but I will say that he is probably not very popular.
Yeah.
Well, true.
He has a cult following, and he has a certain cachet, but, you know.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Chauncey, you have some interesting choices on books that you would like to see written. You'd like to see a book on the Misfits from inception to Danzig leaving, preferably written by their bassist, Jerry Only.
And their current singer.
Why specifically Jerry Only?
Well, he basically was the songwriter and major force behind the band the whole time. At times it was him and Glenn Danzig, but then Danzig would leave and Jerry would carry the torch. So that's the side I want to hear, the side that kept going, not the side that kept stepping away. Not that there's anything wrong with stepping away. You know, we all like Twist of Cain. It's all right. You know, but and even Sam Hain was good. But yeah, Jerry Only, I just find him fascinating. He's kind of the guy that didn't make a multi-million-dollar business. I mean, maybe over time he's made $1 million or something. I don't know. But, you know, he just seems to be sort of the thing that I like about punk and rock and roll music and garage rock is that he's a guy that likes to play music, and he gets to do that.
Which leads to the next book you'd like to see written, a book on the Redding, California 80s to 90s punk scene. And
yeah,
you wrote in your email to me.
I grew up in.
Yeah, you said we were a small town, but we had a lot going on. Tell us about that scene.
Well, we had like 20 bands, you know, in a population of like 70,000 people, you know. So there was stuff going on every weekend and lots of stupid drama and lots of bands falling apart due to drugs and babies, just like real life. I think it'd make a fun little microcosm of life. You know, a few bands even moved out to move on. And so it seems like there's a lot there that could kind of be what happens to everybody, but in one little area. And of course I'm from there, so I'm just all like, oh.
I'm thinking you're the one to write this book, Chauncey.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And how much of an overlap between the Reading meth industry and the Reading punk scene was there?
You know, surprisingly little, because in Reading, meth was big. Now, everybody had their stints, and there was a time that it would hit everybody. But I think there was a lot of like, screw that, and people coming back around. So we had one thing that made it healthy there is, to me, there are two kinds of punks, and both tell the other kind they're not really punks. You know, you got the kinds who want to like fuck everything up, fuck the world, we hate everything. And then you have like the DIY punks, and most punks are the DIY punks. You know, most punks like 7 Seconds and The Clash, and you know, these band Operation Ivy. These are bands talking about building things and creating things and making the world better and so on and so forth. And luckily we had a healthy dose of those. so there was always somebody putting stuff on. So did meth hit it? Oh yeah, that'd be a big part of the book. But luckily there was always some people holding on, you know.
You have another book, Chauncey, where you have a specific choice for the author, a biography of Al Jorgensen of Ministry, preferably not written by Al Jorgensen. Paul Barker can write it. Paul's the bassist. Similar to the Misfits book. So why Paul Barker?
Because Al Jorgensen is a guess. I don't know the guy, just seen the interviews, listened to the lyrics. I'm a massive fan. I want no ill will for him. But I think he's like a mentally ill drug addict. And so I'm not sure that a book written by him would, for one, be able to be read, but for two, would be all that accurate.
The memory's a little fuzzy.
Right.
Who is the Edgar Broughton Band? This is one you'd like to see a book written on them. And you said in the email to me, they sounded good and batshit. For those not familiar, who is the Edgar Broughton Band? Is that the pronunciation? Broughton?
Yeah, Broughton. I'm barely familiar with them. So I started doing a radio show called Archaic Radio with my buddy John. And we started going down these rabbit holes of proto metal and garage rock. And down there somewhere, we found the Edgar Broughton Band, who does this song called Out Demons Out, which is just this great song of them like chanting out demons out while some guy is going off over the top. So they were kind of like a proto metal band in England. And there's this story about them, and they were on their way to becoming a pretty big band in the area. And they handed out like spray paint and were like rebelling in this small town. And apparently them and a bunch of kids like vandalized a small town. And that kind of put an end to their career. Nobody wanted to work with them or book them after that. And that's really the story that I want.
That does sound like a good book. Yeah. And Lothar, some good picks. A book on the esoteric influences on Tool. That would be interesting. And a book on the history of Blue Oyster Cult. I like that pick.
Yeah, I think having Sandy Pearlman's not around anymore, but
our manager, Sandy Pearlman, right?
Yeah, who also wrote a lot of their lyrics for like the first 5 or 6 albums and created the whole mythology along with Joe Bouchard for what became the Imaginos saga that was originally in Secret Treaties, the beginning of. But there's so much interesting information there that I think there'd be some fascinating things. I'd like to know the real story about Susie that keeps appearing in all these different songs. That was one of Sandy Pearlman's ex-girlfriends. That keeps showing up in these sinister ways in various songs.
So here, some trivia. Let's challenge your Blue Oyster Cult trivia, Lothar. Which song is Howard Stern in? Which Blue Oyster Cult song? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, it was off of Club Ninja.
Right. He was friends with the band, I guess, and they asked him.
Yeah. I'm blanking on the name.
I'm counting on you because I forget.
I will. Yeah, hang on one second. I know it's off of Club Ninja.
Yeah, we're gonna.
And it is.
I believe he gets the points if it's actually off Club Ninja. I mean,
that's close enough.
Yeah, because Club Ninja.
When the War Comes.
Is that the name of the track? When the War Comes.
That's the name of the yeah.
Yeah, you hear him. I think he's delivering like he's on the air in the beginning.
All hail the revolution, and then it goes into the.
Yeah, because they're from Long Island, so Howard was right nearby, so that's why he was tapped to do that one. Now the esoteric influences on Tool.
Well, they were part of some ceremonial magical groups, and they've brought in things like, there's a lot of information that's in some of their songs, and especially Lateralis has a whole lot that's in there. I've heard rumors, and I'd love to hear this verified or not, is that the drummer, not only does he work in numerology and different esoteric Pythagorean theories into stuff, like they try in the song Lateralis, they try and work in the Fibonacci sequence into that, but supposedly he has rearranged his drum set for performances to where when he's drumming, he's actually drawing out different mathematical and magical sigils.
Oh, that's
so that when he's drumming, it's actually kind of like a ritual.
That is insane. I love it.
Yeah. So I'd love to see how much is there. When I haven't been onto their website in ages, but when right around Lateralis and then 10,000 Days came out, they were doing a lot of stuff on their website that had some blog posts about some of the stuff that they were into and things like that. And so it was like, you're teasing us, but you're not really coming right out. But they're not just the sort of heavy metal prog rockers that are like playing with the aesthetics. It's part of their belief system and part of their practice.
Wow. Let's get to concerts. What is the first concert you guys ever attended? I guess we'll start with Mark.
Oh, it was Robert Plant in 1990.
Oh, that's not bad.
In Richmond.
The
And,
Manic Nirvana tour? Was that the one?
Yeah, it was Manic Nirvana, and it was pretty good. Some people kept throwing lemons on the stage because, he was
Lemon song.
also known as the lemon squeezer.
Oh,
yeah, you got to call HR on that one.
And so
Squeeze my lemon.
he kept kicking them off, and finally he stopped and he says, "Stop putting the lemons on there. That's not me anymore." And I'm like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Sure, it is you.
Yeah.
They make
still
Alison
playing that
Krauss
character.
uncomfortable.
You want to piss him off even more? Say, play Stairway, Robert. Play Stairway.
Some people did chant that.
Oh,
Believe it or not, some people did chant that.
Oh, God, he'll
ignored
never
it.
play that. Oh, yeah, he cannot. Yeah. Chauncey, your first concert ever?
Well, of course, growing up playing in bands, there were a lot of things that we called concerts. But as far as like going
Big
to a first
time,
big concert would be Arco Arena. I went for Faith No More opening for Billy Idol.
Oh, that's a good
great.
show. Yeah.
And Billy Idol had a huge fist on top of the stage that lit up and said "rude dude" across the front, like huge, like the size of my garage, huge.
Yeah.
And at the end of the thing, it all like turns over and it all like flips off the entire audience.
What year are we talking here? 90 probably around, right? 89, 90?
Yeah, somewhere in there. He had a cane on stage because it was right after the motorcycle accident.
That's it.
But I was there for Faith No More because I was, I like to consider myself on the beginning of the rap rock train.
Yeah, Mike Patton.
I think the last thing that I caught out of them would be old, and that'd be Midlife Crisis that I really liked. Now I've heard things since then, and I'm all, hey, this is all right, and it's gone on, but that was the last like new one that kind of stuck with me.
Lothar, first concert ever?
I went to 2 concerts within 2 weeks of each other when I was 12 years old. So I can't remember which one. It was either Eddie Grant before Killer on the Rampage came out, before he broke out with Electric Avenue. One of my mom's friends took me to that concert. It's probably the first time that I got stoned, and the only time for years afterwards I got stoned from the secondhand smoke in the small room filled with Rastafarian fans.
That's like where I hope to go when I die. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Or a BB King concert that my mom took me to.
Okay. Wow.
I remember a woman screaming at the stage, "Go out with me, BB. Take me. I won't leave you the way she did."
Yeah. Call me Lucille.
This is what it means to be a music star. It's like you get people doing this at you.
Yeah, those are good, man. Mine would have been Kiss Hot in the Shade tour 89 in New Haven, Connecticut at the old New Haven Coliseum, which is not there anymore. Wow. Yep. Who are your favorite bands and artists?
Well, as an old guy that works on the computer a lot, unfortunately, I think it's like Time Cop 1983 because I like new wave synth music while I'm working. I mean, that's what
that's coming
Spotify
back.
will put it. Yeah, but my favorite consistently through my life has probably been Tom Waits.
Okay, yeah, Tom Waits.
And then, of course, I like all the bands I grew up on, like, the Misfits, The Clash, Kennedy, stuff like that. But Tom Waits has been... a year hasn't gone by in my life where I haven't listened to a few albums all the way through.
Lothar, we'll go with you next.
Hard for me to pick. I'm one of those people where it's like, but I got 30 that I love. What are you talking about?
I'm like that too, yeah.
But, if I had to pick, I would say, even though I don't listen to them all the time, they were so influential that they're still so part of my DNA. Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Blue Oyster Cult, and Dio.
Okay.
Dio solo stuff.
Can't go wrong with that list. We finished with you, Mark.
Well, Led Zeppelin. That's my top.
Zepp?
It's always been my top. Got into them when I was probably like 10 or 11. Saw the cover of the 4th album, and I was like, what the heck is this? Put it on, and I was like, oh. The Beatles, kind of. I grew up, I didn't know anybody that didn't like the Beatles until I was in high school when people were like, they suck. Pink Floyd, most definitely. Always been into Pink Floyd. A lot of the classic rock. The Animals, love the Animals, the Stones, and I'm gonna go Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap is awesome.
I too know every word, every Spinal Tap.
Hell yes.
No, I don't, but I wish I did. I wish I did.
I've seen that movie so many times.
It's great. It's a great movie.
How about favorite authors or writers? Like, who inspires your style of writing, Mark?
Well, Richard Matheson, Rod Serling, all the guys from Twilight Zone. Then a lot of the guys from the 80s, Clive Barker, Stephen King, I think, which probably influenced me to write my first story. I was probably reading Christine, and I go, oh, man, this chapter sucks. What did I know? It didn't suck. It was good. Thought I could do better than him. We'll never reach that area.
Chauncey.
Well, definitely Clive Barker and H.P. Lovecraft. I would say that those are ones that I listen to over and over and over. But I would say I'm as much influenced by other writing into my writing. One thing that ruined me was Robotech. I like to think of, so I can tell you what influenced me to not succeed at writing. Robotech and J.R.R. Tolkien made me think that everything had to be so epic that it was incapable of being accomplished. And hence, I got a lot of good beginnings, a lot of good endings, and that's about it.
Lothar, you?
If we're talking genre stuff, I'd say Robert E. Howard, Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, a lot of those early weird tales writers. But when it comes to my personal style and what has made me think about, like, oh, I want to play around with some of these techniques and see how I can make it in my voice, it was more like people like Joan Didion. Her nonfiction has been a huge influence on many fiction writers, along with Bret Easton Ellis, which is one of my influences, Hubert Selby Jr., a lot of the more like transgressive people. So Clive Barker fits into that a little bit, but where I'm at now is that style and aesthetics is just as important, if not in some cases more important than plot and theme. So I'm really enjoying people that play around with style and make that how things come across. And that ties in a little bit with like filmic stuff of like how you can have one movie done by the same plot done by one director that's like a TV director, and it'll be one thing, and then you have someone like a Stanley Kubrick do it, or a William Friedkin, and it's going to be something completely different in the way that it is told. So I like authors that challenge me on how things are told. Like, I will never ape Cormac McCarthy. If anybody's read him, he's notorious for not using any punctuation.
He's good. He's really good.
He wrote The Road. He wrote No Country for Old Men. People like that. I get inspired by him, even though I go, there's no way in hell I would ever do this. Yeah. But it makes me think of things in a new way. What is a story? How can you do a story in a different way? And I'd also throw in a Raymond Carver and Shirley Jackson, who did The Haunting of Hill House that people know about. Her short stories are almost like Zen koans of mid-century American life. Like, instead of what is the sound of one hand clapping, I could say, what is the sound of one heart breaking? Would be like a lot of Shirley Jackson short stories.
True. Very true.
What's the best time of day, or when does your best material come to you?
Unfortunately, it's when I'm working, and that really sucks. That really sucks because you can't stop and do, or I guess I can because I work overnight. I might stop and pull out my phone and do some. The best time for me anymore is if I can, 7 o'clock in the morning, and do it a couple hours, that kind of thing. Maybe from 7 to 9. Try to get some sort of routine going for that. It used to be 11 a.m. when I'd get up from sleeping from work, at 11 a.m. to about 3 or 4 in the day. And then maybe go back to it at night if I was off.
Yeah. How about you guys, Chauncey?
Well, I for one definitely agree with Mark that, when you're working and would rather do something else, that's when all those thoughts come in. So anytime I'm working, and then one bad side of that is this is where I work. You're looking at my office. So I really have to force myself to, because I work on it throughout the day. So like I'll work on something for an hour and I'm all right, I'm going to put my head down for half an hour, and then that'll give me a half hour to screw around on whatever I want to. But I would say that the most calming, because I'm a very high stress individual. I always think that like something's going to happen, and I need to deal with it, is when all my family is asleep upstairs and I'm the only one awake. So, 9 to 11 probably PM is when I feel the most free, no communications. I can get stuff done and sort of dream and imagine for a few hours without imminent terror.
Yeah. Do you ever fear you're going to be that character in what's the Stephen King movie where James Caan is a writer? And
Misery.
Misery.
Someone's going to break both your ankles while you're tied up to a bed.
Man,
You're my favorite author, Chauncey.
So my day job is like, business marketing, and unfortunately it is not magazine marketing. It's a very drastically different thing so magazine marketing is something I'm learning, but we have this thing like, what about when it gets like this much traffic? Are we going to need to change our website? And I tell people, we should be so lucky as to have that problem.
Sure.
And so as a writer, I'd say if there was a woman out there that wanted to hack my foot off and in the book edition and hobble me on the film, I should be so lucky. I'd like to think I'm that good. Yeah,
what a wonderful, that's you being positive. That's, I like it. I like it.
Get better door locks.
Lothar, what about you?
Once upon a time, and if I was ever independently wealthy and could do this, midnight to 3 a.m. has such that beautiful atmosphere, right? So what I had to learn to do, and this also comes from the audio drama world that Mark and I first came from, of where I produce audio dramas also. And so to replicate that, if I can come up into my head the soundtrack of what I want to write and put together a playlist or an album or whatever, and then listen to that, that'll get me in that same mind state that used to be midnight to 3 a.m. So once I can create the soundtrack for what I haven't even written yet, but it creates the vibe and the emotion and the atmosphere of the world that I want it to be in, then all of a sudden everything flows pretty easily.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
The initial planning and then the writing.
Yeah, it's just everybody has their certain, they get in the zone at a certain time of day, or like I was saying before, maybe a certain time of year. So I want to give you guys the chance to plug some of the other projects aside from Twisted Pulp. Like I know, Mark, you have a new project. It's an acid noir novel called Long Gone Dead. It's published by Next Chapter Books. You sent me a playlist to go along with the book, by the way, which I'll put in the show notes page. You also sent me a synopsis of this book, which looks really cool. Long Gone Dead. Everything was fine for P.I. Richard Cole until the murder of funk music singer Bobby Clark and a mysterious statue called the Obelisk brought some strange things to the town of Odarko. Strange things appear from TV screens at random, and people vanish without warning. Flying saucers and shadow people watching his every move are just some of the weirdness in this acid noir novel set in 1975. When is this coming out? Do we know?
They keep having a problem with the beginnings of it. They think the lyrics that at the beginning is from another band. And I keep telling them, no, I wrote those lyrics. They're awful lyrics. Why would you even think they're real?
Well, so they're fearing a lawsuit or a copyright lawsuit or something?
Yeah, I quote In My Time of Dying from Led Zeppelin later on in the book, and I told them, well, you can remove that. That's no big deal. But it is legal to quote them. You can even chop the quote in half. It's fine as long as you use quotations, and the copy editor took the quotations off of that. Like, why would you do that? But okay, it's you're publishing it. And so they keep sending me emails saying, are you sure you wrote this? Are you sure you wrote the artifact book that appears in this? And I go, it's fiction. It's not there. Look on Amazon.
Wow.
Mark, are you sure you didn't murder that person?
Are you sure? Yeah, let's ask you again.
Well, you'll never know about the bodies under my bed. So, it's a sequel to the first book, which is Yardbird.
You're on Facebook, you're on social media, so people can follow you to.
Yeah, Facebook.
Yeah. That's cool. Chauncey and Lothar, any projects you guys want to plug?
Go ahead, Chauncey.
Yeah, well, outside of the magazine, we definitely have a book of interviews coming out with Bear Media, and it's interviews with Marvel writers and artists from the 70s, the Bronze Era, early 80s, stuff like that. And that's cool. Exciting. That's probably the longest term project that we've worked on. So it's exciting to see some fruition. It broke Lothar as an editor, but but he'll be happy when he's holding a copy.
Absolutely.
So when can we expect this?
This
summer. June the 2nd, I believe.
June the 2nd,
I believe, or July 2nd. Sorry. I think
Okay.
it's July 2nd.
Yeah, sometime this summer.
Hopefully.
And Lothar, what do you have coming up?
Chauncey will probably also mention this. We do Screaming Eye Press is the sort of umbrella that
Yes.
Twisted Pulp is under, and we put out a couple collections, Born Under a Bad Sign 1 and 2, which is stories about luck, specifically bad luck, which we're pretty proud of. There's some really great stories that people have contributed in there. We have a book called Rumble, which is a great thing about men's adventure, and just leave it at that, because it's got some other things going on in there. I do some stuff in the audio drama world, so I'm one of the members of the Mutual Audio Network. I curate, or actually Jack Ward curates. I host the Wednesday Wonders show. So every Wednesday, if people want to listen to science fiction or fantasy podcasts hosted by me, that comes out every Wednesday. Three shows every day with different genres. So if anybody wants the biggest curation of modern audio drama, look up the Mutual Audio Network feed. We also do Sonic Echo, which is a retrospective of me and Jack Ward and Jeffrey Billard talking about old-time radio shows and why people should still listen. We did a season on Westerns, and we're currently in a very long, spread out over about 2 to 3 years because people got busy, on noir and hard
Oh,
rock.
I love that stuff, man. I'm an old school radio guy. My dad before me, so I love that. Like the
Oh, cool.
the shadow note.
Well, we should keep the conversation going offline, and we can send a lot of stuff for you.
Yes, sponsored by Chesterfield Cigarettes. That was the other one right back in the day. Oh, I love that. Love that stuff. Yeah, so people can stay up to date with you guys individually and with Twisted Pulp. Where can people go?
Well, you can pretty much search up Screaming Eye Press or Twisted Pulp Magazine, and you'll find us. We'll be right there. But screamingeyepress.com, Twisted Pulp Magazine, you'll pretty much find a hub for everything right there. And
This
of
was
course,
great.
you know, we're dabbling in all the social medias. So you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. What's that one the kids like? Tumblr?
TikTok.
How old am I?
You dancing for
I don't know.
TikTok?
Get in there.
When are we getting our MySpace page?
MySpace. I loved MySpace. I thought you could do so
I
much.
can't get
with
the
it.
animated cursor to work.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, this is awesome. Chauncey Haworth, Lothar Tuppan, and Mark Slade of Twisted Pulp. Guys, thanks.
Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, this has been fun.
Absolutely.
That's it. It's in the books.